Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports on the original channel, Chris Wyatt. Welcome back. Breaking news out of the United States here this afternoon, where earlier this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the liberal fantasies of the leftists who are trying to stop Donald John Trump from becoming president of the United States again, because they're fearful that, unlike the last time where he failed to take action against criminals in the bureaucracy, criminals in political parties, and criminals around this country who undermined this democracy and betrayed this nation, perhaps this time he'll actually do it. They're fearful that their leftist fantasies will not be the order of the day. And my apologies for the late broadcast, but YouTube is playing its games again. Once again, two things. Number one, I started this broadcast on time, and I sat here for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, while YouTube did not stream it. It said that it was live, but it showed no data. It was a blank screen, and then suddenly after a minute and a half, it came up. As I ended the stream, suddenly it went to my wallpaper. This is YouTube subterfuge. I don't know why they do this nonsense. It's very frustrating. This channel doesn't have much content these days, yet they still harass me on it. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that I had to restart and reset the whole thing up and then put the link out so people know where it's at. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate the handful of people who are currently here. I'm going to bring you news about this event and show you the media's reaction to what's happening here. And just to wrap things up very quickly, the state of Colorado, in violation of the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, decided that Donald John Trump was not eligible to serve on to appear on the Colorado ballot for president because he had participated or incited an insurrection. There were a lot of problems with that decision, which I said were all unconstitutional, and my analysis has been borne out to be 100% correct. Now, the court, on a very narrow position, said that the states do not have the authority to address Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is what I've said from the outset. There are many other problems with the court decision in Supreme Court Colorado, all of which are repulsive to a representative republic. It's an intentional election interference effort to remove Trump from the ballot and prevent this country from restoring itself back on a path to prosperity and justice for all. This is what their desire was. This was followed up by an appointed official who lost elections, then was appointed to be Secretary of State in the state of Maine, a state with 12 voters. I'm being facetious there, no insult for Maine residents, but the point is that the Secretary of State, who has no authority, decided that it was her decision that Donald John Trump had been participated in insurrection. Bear in mind the fact that Donald Trump has never been charged by any court. He's never been accused of insurrection. He's never been charged. He's never been prosecuted. He's never been convicted. Yet these corrupt officials in Colorado and now Illinois most recently, as well as Maine, all removed Trump from the ballot in violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The Constitution gave sovereign states lots of rights, but the 14th Amendment altered that, and it reserved that right to the Congress, which is what I said from the outset in this situation. We're going to take a look at this and see what the response is from people. Hey, there's Hakan Agman. We haven't seen you in ages. Anyway, so that's the reality here, folks. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, you know how often we get 9-0 decisions in the Supreme Court? Almost never. Rarely do we have a 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court. In this decision, they said that Colorado erred and must restore Trump to the ballot, which means that all states must do so, and the 4 territories as well. Now, this will stick in the call of demon rat leftists who are sick and twisted individuals. They are satanic in their desire to remove Trump from the ballot and deny millions of voters the right to pick their candidate. Now, the court has been overruled by the Supreme Court, but the media's reaction is comical, saying this is disastrous for democracy, saying that this is not really a 9-0 decision, it's a 5-4 decision, playing games with the decision. Let's get to this very quickly here, folks. This thing was telegraphed early on by the Supreme Court when the questions were asked by liberal justices about what's to stop other states from just arbitrarily moving candidates from the ballot if Colorado does it, which was a good question by Associate Justice Elena Kagan. She definitely got that right. Where is this at? Okay. Sorry. All right. I was looking for something. So let's get to this story here. In the New York Times, the justices ruled the 14th Amendment did not allow states to bar the former president from the ballot. The justices gave different reasons, but the decision was unanimous. That's some honest news reporting from the New York Times. They've been a little more balanced of late. I'm a bit shocked. Trump prevails in Supreme Court challenge to his eligibility. Here's the latest. Supreme Court ruled today that former President Donald John Trump should remain in Colorado's primary ballot, rejecting a challenge to his eligibility for another term that could have upended the presidential race by taking him off ballots around the nation. Though the justices offered different reasons, the decision was unanimous. All of the opinions focused on legal issues, and none of them took position on whether he engaged in insurrection. All the justices agree that individual states may not bar candidates for federal office under constitutional provision, Section 3, 14th Amendment, that bars insurrectionists from holding office. 4 justices would have left it that. That sentence doesn't even make sense. 4 justices would have left it that. That's not even a complete sentence. But a 5-justice majority in unsigned opinion went on to say that Congress must act to save Section 3 force. The Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates, the majority wrote, adding that detailed federal legislation was required to determine who is disqualified under the provision. In a joint concurring opinion, the court's 3 liberal members, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Brown-Jackson, expressed frustration at what they said was the majority's needless overreach. Although federal enforcement of Section 3 is in no way at issue, the majority announces novel rules for how that enforcement must operate. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, in a brief concurring opinion, agreed that the majority had gone too far, saying that it should not have addressed the complicated question of whether federal legislation is the exclusive vehicle through which Section 3 can be enforced. But she urged the public to focus on common ground. For present purposes, our differences are far less important than our unanimity. All 9 justices agree on the outcome of this case. That is a message Americans should take home. Yep, it's the most important decision before the Supreme Court since Bush versus Gore in 2000, when the Florida Supreme Court was overruled for violating Florida law, election law. So it's huge. It's absolutely huge, folks. And the left is trying to twist this into something it's not. CNN reports the Supreme Court unanimously rules to keep Trump on the Colorado ballot. Trump spoken since then. He praised the Supreme Court for ruling to keep him on the Colorado ballot, calling it very well crafted. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 today that former President Trump should appear on the ballot in Colorado, a decision with nationwide implications that follows months of debate about whether the frontrunner violated the 14th Amendment. No, it's not a debate about whether he violated the 14th Amendment. You can still argue that Donald Trump violated the 14th Amendment, but Colorado does not have the authority under the Constitution to adjudicate that. As I've said since the outset of these ridiculous leftist fantasies, the Constitution is quite clear on this. Now, I don't agree with the Constitution, but that's the Constitution, so that's the rule of the land, supreme rule of the land. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer in the United States or as a member of the state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer to support the Constitution, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. By the way, that clause only applies to people who were formally elected to state legislatures and are federal office holders. So if you're a citizen and you've engaged in insurrection, the 14th Amendment does not disqualify you from holding office. Did you know that? Did you realize that? The way this is crafted, it was to go after the former Confederates, the Copperheads, and keep them from coming in and starting and fomenting a new insurrection division in the Union. There is no restriction on Joe's six-pack if let's say someone is convicted of January 6th, right? For official proceedings, not insurrection. But even if they're convicted of insurrection, they could serve their time and then run for office. This does not prevent them from running for office. That is an interesting thing, too, which no one's ever mentioned here. But the president is a former president, and I am a former office holder as a military officer. Therefore, if I were ever to engage in such a thing, I would be disqualified. So, okay, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So only Congress has the authority to prevent someone from being in office. That's the bottom line here, folks. That is the bottom line, and the left is just hating it. They were divided on how broadly the court should rule on this, and that's what I mentioned a moment ago. Trump's victory. The opinion is a massive victory for Trump, vanquishing one of the many legal threats that have both plagued and animated his 2024 campaign against Biden. The decision came one day before Colorado's primary on Super Tuesday, Trump calling it a win for the country. And I agree, it's a 100% win. Whether Donald Trump is the next president or not, it really isn't germane. This is a triumph for the rule of law. Colorado unilaterally decided that they were going to determine who gets to be president in the United States. Number one, for a person never charged with insurrection, a person never convicted of insurrection. So basically what the Colorado court was doing was determining that Trump engaged in insurrection, and that's a lie. That's a fraud. And that fraud was perpetrated also in Illinois this past week and previously by a appointed official in Maine. This ends the nonsense. Congratulations to former president. Franklin Graham has just put on Twitter. Yeah. So what happens next after this historic outcome? Supreme Court essentially rendered moot a string of ongoing state-level challenges to former President Trump's candidacy under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Both Colorado Supreme Court and Maine's top election official had determined Trump should not be a Republican presidential primary ballot in the wake of 2020 election loss and his events on January 6th. But the new U.S. Supreme Court opinion found that state officials had no such authority to make that determination based on the 14th Amendment, which is what I've said from the outset. That paves the way for Trump to remain on every state's ballot and is likely winning the Republican nomination. Indeed. While they ruled on this Colorado decision, which he appealed in January, the rationale appears to end the ongoing legal dispute. It does. His candidacy has been questioned and reviewed in states including California, Illinois, Virginia, and more with contradictory results. Now, until Colorado, every single criminal effort to remove Donald Trump from the ballot had been defeated. In Michigan, in Tennessee, throughout the country, it had been defeated over and over again in Carolina. And only when Colorado defied the rule of law and the Constitution by arbitrarily, unilaterally making decisions was turned in the opposite direction. Then Maine did the same thing, and then Illinois did it. Yeah, the left is melting down. They'll blame this on the court. The Orange County Register, admittedly, what is traditionally a conservative district of California, but no longer the case. But the Orange County Register says the Supreme Court unanimously defends democracy. Agreed, 100%. On Monday, the Supreme Court unanimously rejected Colorado's effort to remove former President Trump from presidential ballots. The Colorado Supreme Court invoked Section 3 of the 14th Amendment unconstitutionally, which bars those who engage in insurrection against federal government from federal office to justify that attempt. But the Supreme Court ruled that because the Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing it against federal office holders and candidates, the Colorado Supreme Court's decision could not stand. It will also have ramifications for states across the country which attempted to follow Colorado as unlawful, declaring Trump ineligible for the presidency. Democrats across the country have sought to undermine democracy by trying to remove Trump from state ballots, but now their efforts have been rightly rejected by not only conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court, by the liberal ones too. Among the biggest political losers in this whole sham includes Lieutenant Governor Eleni Koulounakis, who thought she could gain political clout by calling for Trump's removal from California's ballots. So she has lost here. The Constitution is clear. You must be 40 years old and not an insurrectionist. Actually, the Constitution is 35. That dingbat. See, these are the people we elect to office. Yeah. Koulounakis wrote in a factually incorrect letter to the California Secretary of State, Shirley Weber. Now, she wrote a letter in which she got it wrong. How stupid are these people? These are the morons elected to office, don't even know what the age you have to be to run for office is. As a reminder to Koulounakis, the age requirement, according to the Constitution, to run for president is 35. 35. Yeah, even as Governor Gavin Newsom was among those who stood up for democracy, there's no doubt that Donald Trump is a threat to our liberties, he said, and even to our democracy. But in California, we defeat candidates at the polls. Everything else is a political distraction. True. The second part, not the first part. This whole thing has been a distraction. Trump may indeed be as bad as his critics assert. The editorial board of the Orange County Register described Trump as a demagogue, a liar, and a fraud. Wow. So that's kind of balanced. Yep. Supreme Court ballot decision. Trump addresses Colorado case future immunity agreements. This is in NBC News, which I know hurt their feelings big time. Yep. Trump applauds. Maine Secretary of State withdraws ruling that Trump is ineligible. Yeah, good. Maine Secretary of State Sheena Bellows has withdrawn a previous ruling. I've reviewed the Anderson decision carefully. The Supreme Court has ruled that individual states lack authority to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment with respect to federal offices. Consistent with my oath and obligation to follow the law and the Constitution pursuant to the Anderson decision, I hereby withdraw my determination that Trump's primary petition is invalid. Of course, you ignored the rule of law, which I can read, not being an attorney, you moron Sheena Bellows, and actually removed Trump, causing chaos in this country. You need to be impeached, removed, whatever it takes to remove idiots from office in Maine. You must be removed. Yep. Trump applauds the ruling. Trump took a victory lap at Mar-a-Lago this afternoon. It will go a long way towards bringing our country together. You cannot take someone out of a race because the opponent would like to have it that way. Yep. He also used the moment to encourage the Supreme Court to rule in his favor as he argues for immunity over 2020 as well. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president. Asserting that the commander-in-chief has to be able to make free and clear decisions. Well, I'll tell you what. The Democrats want Trump's immunity stripped and a federal appeals court illegitimately stripped his immunity. Here's the problem from that. Qualified immunity or full immunity, whichever it is for a president, if that gets stripped, then guess what? guess what? Barack Obama, we're coming for you. We're coming for you in the courts for your unlawful extrajudicial murder of an American naturalized citizen and his son in Yemen with a drone strike, violating due process, which is guaranteed in the Constitution. You murdered an American citizen in Yemen, and you will pay the consequences if immunity is stripped. Mark my words, folks. If the Supreme Court does not ensure that Trump has immunity, we will go after Barry Obama, and we will bring him down, and he will be in leg irons. You wait for it. You wait for it. That is what is coming. So dream on, lefties. Dream on, you fantasy socialist communists. Keep thinking you've got something great going here. You are undermining the very fabric of this republic, and you will pay a steep price for that. Your friends like Tom Wolf will find out that their qualified immunity is also stripped. Tom Wolf will lose his immunity and will be prosecuted for crimes against humanity for sticking COVID-positive patients knowingly into nursing homes to kill off our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles. Yeah, so, hey, you want to play this game about taking immunity away from government officials who are elected? It's a very dangerous, dangerous path, leftists, a very dangerous path. That's the bottom line there. So keep playing at that. Keep playing at that. You'll see what happens. Yep. So, Justice, now this is where the left takes this 9-0. So it's 9-0. 9-0. Nix. 9-0. Rien. 9-0. And the left is saying that this is not a victory for Trump. What planet do these people live on? The Hill, a leftist publication, says Barrett joins liberal justices on Trump ballot ban ruling going too far. That's the story they're not running, is that he won. The story they're running is that the president got a unanimous victory, but it was a 5-4 division amongst justices emerged beneath the surface. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what the left is saying about it. That's their focus. So here Slate, which is garbage, published by, Bill Gates' little fans out there, fanboys in Seattle. Slate, which is just a reprehensible, bogus publication, says the Supreme Court's unanimous Trump ballot ruling is actually a 5-4 disaster by Mark Joseph Stern. Yeah, on Monday, the Supreme Court unanimously reversed the Colorado Supreme Court decision. But the top line holding is where the unanimity ended because 5 conservative justices just couldn't help themselves. They went much further than the case required, announcing an entirely new rule that Congress alone, through a particular kind of legislation, may enforce the Constitution bar on insurrectionists holding office. As the 3 liberal justices pointed out in a separate opinion that glows hot white with indignation, the majority's overreach attempts to insulate all alleged insurrectionists from future challenges to their holding of federal office. They are, of course, correct. After that decision, it's impossible to imagine a federal candidate up to and including the president ever being disqualified for assuming office because of their participation in insurrection. No, it's not. They are just bum hurt that this was a 9-0 decision, so they're going to try to undermine it any way they possibly can. The BBC says Trump wins as Supreme Court sidesteps political landmines, accusing the Supreme Court of being cowardly here. U.S. Supreme Court has slammed the door on Colorado's illegitimate effort to remove Donald Trump from its presidential primary ballot, and on every other state that has made or considering such idiotic efforts to disqualify him. The top court ruled that only Congress has the power to strike down a former president from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. The unsigned unanimous ruling is a significant win for Trump, whose presidential campaign now can proceed without roadblocks erected by individual states, courts, or election officials. In issuing its opinion, the 9 court justices sidestepped some of the biggest political landmines. They did not opine on whether Mr. Trump had in fact engaged in insurrection, but of course that wasn't the question before the Supreme Court, BBC, you propaganda outlet. The question raised was not, did he participate in insurrection? The question was, did the states have the authority to do it, which is what I argued from the beginning. They didn't discuss whether the attack on the Capitol by the former president's supporters constituted insurrection at all, or was a riot as characterized by Mr. Trump's lawyers. It really isn't germane. The court also didn't delve into whether presidents are specifically exempt from the 14th Amendment's insurrection language. That's a fair point. They didn't. And the insurrection clause does not allow for the removal of presidents or vice presidents. It doesn't. So that's a good point there. The court focused solely on which authorities have the power to enforce insurrection provision. Only Congress, which is what I've said from the outset. Not individual states have the power. It held the view that provides a patchwork scenario for which a candidate could be eligible in some states and disqualified in others, which is not allowed. Yep. In the real world, with a closely divided Senate and Republican-controlled House of Representatives, that means the chance of Trump being ruled ineligible under the 14th Amendment are 0. Of course they're 0. Yeah, this is where the court's 6-3 ideological divide reared its head once again. How so? The 3 liberal justices on the court, while agreeing that Colorado went too far, wanted to leave the door open for possible national efforts to determine whether Trump is ineligible. That is not what they said. The court's decision, Sotomayor said, severely limits action by the federal government, whether the courts or other federal authorities, to remove insurrectionist candidates from the ballot. That's untrue. There is no authority other than Congress. It's a political decision. Yeah, so this is just nonsense. First off, it's not a 6-3 conservative liberal split. It's a 5-4. Justice John Roberts is not a conservative. He never has been. He's been a fake conservative put in by the New World Order stooge George Bush. Well, here are some of the takeaways, according to the Associated Press, from this ruling. Number one, it's a technical, but still a big win. The most significant thing the court did Monday was overturn a Colorado Supreme Court decision from December that Trump was not eligible. The High Court stayed its ruling until the Supreme Court acted, and Trump remained on the ballot, and there are 2 other Democratic states that are disqualified in Maine and Illinois. But the Supreme Court had let Colorado ruling stand. It could have triggered a new wave of litigation that might have left Trump disqualified in a checkerboard of states across the country. That is no longer the case. All 9 justices agreed that it was a purview of Congress. A time bomb for January 6th. One possible outcome the case presented was the prospect of unelected judges disqualifying the man dominating one party's presidential primary, who has already received hundreds of thousands of votes in the nominating process. But another potential nightmare is that if Congress is the only entity that can determine whether a presidential hopeful is indeed disqualified for engaging in insurrection, that makes it that determination on January 6, 2025, when required to certify a possible Trump victory in the presidential election. Anyway, ridiculous. Feeling the heat. The 14th Amendment case is one of 2 putting the high court squarely in the midst of the ongoing presidential election. Last week, the court agreed to hear Trump's appeal of a federal ruling that he's not entitled to immunity from criminal charges for his attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Trump's trial on those charges was originally scheduled to begin Monday, but has been postponed because of the battle over his immunity challenge. There you go. And then finally, actions in the states. The states will now have to stop their nonsense. They'll have to stop their nonsense. I have to mention George Floyd gets in here. So far, there's nothing stopping Citizens for Ethics and Responsibility in Washington or any other litigant from pursuing Section 3 case against state and local officials. Legal observers have warned the provision could be used in non-January 6 context as well. Republicans have argued that could apply against Biden for failing to secure the border, or Vice President Kamala Harris for raising bail funds for those jailed after George Floyd's death. Yeah, there you go. So that's what they're saying. Now, here's the actual decision. Is there anybody actually here with this broadcast right now? YouTube did a great job of preventing this thing from being live. And now I've got no feed, so am I even still live again? Oh, we are live. Okay, just checking. Yep, nobody's chatting, and it says 13 people are here. I don't trust YouTube on this. They're really, really hiding this broadcast. This channel is dead. They want me to just give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up on this channel. Yep. Okay, cool. Just listening. Okay, cool beans. So let's go to the decision. Let me try to zoom up a little bit here so you guys can see this better. I got it in a browser, so I don't have to open up a window. So this is the lawsuit. Supreme Court of the United States, Donald John Trump versus Norma Anderson and others. A group of Colorado voters contends that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits former President Trump, who seeks presidential nominee for the Republican Party in this year's election, from becoming president again. The Colorado Supreme Court agreed with that contention. It ordered the Colorado Secretary of State to exclude the former president from the Republican primary ballot and to disregard any write-in votes that Colorado voters might cast for him. Former President Trump challenges that decision on several grounds. Because the Constitution makes Congress rather than the states responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates, we reverse the Colorado Supreme Court decision, is what the Supreme Court says. Last September, about 6 months before the March 5th 2024 Colorado primary election, 4 Republicans and 2 unaffiliated Colorado voters filed a petition against former President Trump and Colorado Secretary of State Gina Griswold in Colorado State Court. These voters, whom we refer to as respondents, I refer to them as traitors, contend that after former President Trump's defeat in the 2020 presidential election, he disrupted the peaceful transfer of power by intentionally organizing and inciting a crowd that breached the Capitol. Really? He intentionally organized that crowd of 500,000 people? No, he didn't organize any crowd. That's simply a lie. And inciting the crowd, you can claim he incited, but that's actually not what the video footage shows. He told people to peacefully march on the Capitol to have their voice heard. That is a far cry from inciting a riot. As Congress met to certify the election results, one consequence of those actions, respondents maintain, is that former President Trump is constitutionally eligible to serve as president again, and they are factually incorrect. Their theory turns on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which I've read to you before. According to the respondent, Section 3 applies to the former president because after taking the presidential oath in 2017, he intentionally incited the breaching of the Capitol on January 6 in order to retain power. How did they, first off, let me ask this quick. How in the world did they think that was actually going to happen? How in the world did they think that Trump was inciting a riot and that he was somehow going to retain power? Did they think the 1.4 million active duty service members were going to obey orders from Trump? Do they think that the 100,000 federal law enforcement officials at all levels were going to obey Trump when he wasn't the president anymore? Or what exactly did they expect was going to happen here? This is just nonsense. Again, this whole theory is just stupid. I've talked about this. The federal government has a continuity of operations plan in place. We saw this with some silly, thing with Kiefer Sutherland show that they created where he was the education secretary and all the other cabinet members were dead, so he's suddenly president, whatever that program was called. No, there is a continuity of government. They have alternate backup sites, including in Maryland and West Virginia, for intelligence, for operations of the government in case of nuclear conflict, in case of civil insurrection, in case of invasion, foreign invasion. This is utter nonsense. There's no way that walking to the Capitol building or breaking into the Capitol building would cause the fall of this government. Remember, in 1814, the British burned the White House. They burned the president's residence and ransacked the District of Columbia. The government didn't fall. Officials fled to Maryland and survived. And Dolly Madison famously saved Wilson Peel's painting of George Washington, despite the fact the White House was burned. So if the British couldn't burn down our government and overturn it in 1814, what makes these morons think that in 2020 that a few hundred people walking around in the Capitol building is going to overthrow a government? These are stupid people of the highest order. They claim that as a result, therefore, he's not a qualified candidate, and that as a result, the Colorado Secretary of State may not place him on the primary ballot. After a 5-day kangaroo court trial, the Supreme Court, the state district court, found that former President Trump had engaged in insurrection with the meaning of Section 3, but nonetheless denied the respondent's petition. So there you go. First off, the court claimed they found that Trump did engage in insurrection, but they're not a competent authority to make that determination. They nonetheless denied so the court said, yes, he engaged in insurrection, but you're not going to get him removed. The court held that Section 3 did not apply because the presidency, which Section 3 does not mention by name, is not in office, which is another argument which I advanced under the United States, and the president is not an officer of the United States within the meaning of that provision. However, these treasonous bastards took this case to the Colorado Supreme Court after losing that case. In December, the Colorado Supreme Court reversed in part and affirmed in part by a 4-3 vote, reversing the district court's operative holding. The majority concluded that for purposes of Section 3, the presidency is in office under the United States and the president is an officer of the United States. That's simply factually untrue. There is no mention of the president in here. They created that out of whole cloth. They fictitiously made that up to keep their demented political leftist view to keep Donald Trump off the ballots. There is nothing in the 14th Amendment that says the president is even applied or the vice president here. The court otherwise affirmed, holding that the Colorado Election Code permitted the respondent's challenge based on Section 3, that Congress need not pass implementing legislation for disqualifications under Section 3 to attach, and the political question doctrine did not preclude judicial review of former President Trump's eligibility, that the district court did not abuse its discretion in admitting into evidence portions of a congressional report on the events of January 6th. With the congressional report is just propaganda too. The fake January 6th committee is the evidence they used, which is a lie and a series of falsehoods about January 6th while ignoring prima facie evidence to the contrary. The fake January 6th fake commission, which are people who will live in infamy, their actions will burn in Hades for the lies they told about January 6th. He said that the district court did not err in concluding that these events constituted an insurrection, that former President Trump engaged in the insurrection, that the former President Trump's speech to the crowd that breached the Capitol was not protected by the First Amendment. Donald Trump did not speak to the crowd at the Capitol building. That is a lie. That is fictitious. Right there, that alone is a lie by the Colorado Supreme Court. Donald Trump spoke at the Ellipse. There's a couple of kilometers between the Ellipse and the Capitol building, separate events. Donald Trump and his team had permits for demonstrations on the mall down by the Washington Monument and the Ellipse. 6 permits. I thought it was 5, but I recently found out that 6 permits were issued by the Capitol Police to other entities, including Alex Jones, for lawful assembly at the Capitol building, unrelated to Trump. Trump did not speak at the Capitol building. He never went there. See, if he'd gone to the Capitol building, they might have an argument here, but they don't. Trump never went there. Trump never spoke to the people of the Capitol building. These are the lies that they tell, the endless lies they tell. Donald Trump was not at the Capitol. He never went there. He was at the Ellipse. And when people were there, it was reported to him that there were people going in the building and some breaking in. Donald Trump went on Twitter and did 2 videos in which he told people to leave the Capitol building peacefully. Do not enter the building. Do not interfere with what's going on. We respect law enforcement. And within minutes after these live broadcasts on Twitter, because the media would not come to the White House media briefing room to cover his speeches because they wanted to report on that instead of Trump trying to tell people to behave themselves, when those things were published, Twitter took them down and suspended his account as part of the whole scam to cover up what actually happened on January 6th. Colorado Supreme Court, according to Secretary Griswold, not to list President Trump's name on the primary ballot or count any write-in votes. Chief Justice Boatwright and Justice Seymour and Birkenkalter each filed dissenting opinions. Under the terms of the opinion of the Colorado Supreme Court, its ruling was automatically stayed pending this court's review. We granted former President Trump's petition for certiorari, which raised a single question. Did the Colorado Supreme Court err in ordering President Trump excluded from the 2024 presidential primary ballot? Concluding that it did, we now reverse the decision. Yep, that's what happened. That's what happened. Designated survivor. That was the program. Yeah. Designated survivor. That's, we have continuity of government. A nuclear war will not end the U.S. federal government. It is that entrenched. It is that wealthy. It is that in control. The stupidity of these people. So there you have it, folks. Donald Trump is on the ballot and they cannot take him off. And they've tried. Now they'll continue with their lawfare, with their bogus lawsuits. I mean, this ridiculous one by Alvin Bragg and this other ridiculous one by Letitia James. They're just nonsense, but they'll continue with it. Now, the 14th Amendment proposed by Congress in 1866 and ratified by the states in 1868 that weren't in rebellion still, the 14th Amendment expanded federal power at the expense of state autonomy and thus fundamentally altered the balance of state and federal power struck by the Constitution. The Seminole Tribe of Florida versus Florida, and also ex parte Virginia. Section 1 of the amendment, for instance, bars the states from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or denying to any person the equal protection of the laws. Section 5, of course, that's not true. Equal protection of law isn't happening today. Look at what's happening to people who defend life. Look what's happening to conservatives. Look what's happening to people yet to be charged with a crime but still in prison over January 6th. There's no equal protection law. There's no due process. There's no speedy trial. The Constitution has been violated by the federal and state authorities. Section 5 confers on Congress power to enforce these prohibitions along with other provisions of the amendment by appropriate legislation. Now, the leftists are saying that the conservative justices went too far in saying exactly what the Constitution says. That's what the 14th Amendment said. They made that point. Section 3 of the amendment likewise restricts state autonomy, but through different means. It was designated to help ensure that an enduring union by preventing former Confederates from returning to power in the aftermath of the Civil War. Statement of Representative Stevens warning that without appropriate constitutional reforms, yelling secessionists and hissing copperheads would take seats in the House. That was the argument. Yep. Senator Howard lamented the prospect of a state legislature made up entirely of disloyal elements absent a disqualification provision. Section 3 aimed at to prevent such resurgence by barring those from office, those who, having once taken an oath to support the Constitution, afterward went into rebellion against the government of the United States. Section 3 works by imposing on certain individuals a preventative and severe penalty, disqualification from holding a wide array of offices, rather than by granting rights to all. It is therefore necessary, as Chief Justice Chase concluded, and the Colorado Supreme Court itself recognized, to ascertain what particular individuals are embraced by the provision. That's what the courts have both said. Chief Justice Chase went on to explain, to accomplish this ascertainment and ensure effective results, proceedings, evidence, decisions, and enforcements of decisions more or less formal are indispensable. For its part, the Colorado Supreme Court also concluded there must be some kind of determination that Section 3 applies to a particular person before disqualification. The Constitution empowers Congress to prescribe how those determinations should be made. The relevant provision is Section 5, which enables Congress, subject, of course, to judicial review, to pass appropriate legislation to enforce the 14th Amendment. Or, as Senator Howard put it at the time the amendment was framed, Section 5 cast upon Congress the responsibility of seeing to it for the future that all the sections of the amendment are carried out in good faith. Yep, that's from the 39th Congress, first session. Congress Section 5 power is critical when it comes to Section 3. Indeed, during a debate on enforcement legislation less than a year after ratification, Senator Trumbull noted that notwithstanding Section 3, hundreds of men were holding office in violation of its terms. The Constitution, Trumbull noted, provided no means for enforcing the disqualification, necessitating a bill to give effect to the fundamental law embraced in the Constitution. The enforcement mechanism Trumbull championed was later enacted as part of the Enforcement Act of 1870, pursuant to the power conferred by Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. This case raised the question of whether states, in addition to Congress, may also enforce Section 3. We conclude that states may disqualify persons holding or attempting to hold state office, but states have no power under the Constitution to enforce Section 3 with respect to federal offices, especially the presidency. Yep, in our federal system, the national government possesses only limited powers. The states and the people retain the remainder. Yep. So the bottom line here is the states have no authority, as I said all along, to remove someone from the ballot for federal office. It's simply not in their purview. And the 14th Amendment makes that clear. Section 5 and Section 3 make it obviously clear, patently clear, blatantly clear, painfully clear. And the leftists have tried to destroy the Constitution with their nonsense. So there you go. That's the bottom line here, folks. That's it. And that's the reality here. So thanks for folks for tuning in. I'm going to wrap it up here. I just want to do a quick live stream on this. The bottom line, once again, the U.S. Supreme Court in a 9-0 decision has told Colorado to foot-sec, to get stuffed, that their decision was unconstitutional, has vacated Colorado's decision, and therefore, by declaring that states do not have the authority to prevent someone from running on the federal ballot, the federal office holder, they do not have the authority. That obviates, that excludes the idiotic decision in Maine, the idiotic decision in Illinois, and all the other fantasies taking place across America, trying to deny Americans the right to decide who the president is. Only Congress has that power. Only they can pass legislation like the 1870 Enforcement Act. And then later they gave amnesty to the former Confederates. Only Congress has that authority, not the states. So Colorado, you're wrong. Illinois, you're wrong. Maine, you're wrong. And all the fantasy, self-pleasuring, hate-wanking fools around the country who tried to do that. This is a major win. Now, you might be saying that, well, that's because you like Trump. I don't like Trump. I vote for him, but I don't like him. But it's because I believe in the Constitution and the sanctity of the rule of law. We are otherwise simply clowns on the stage if we do not follow the rule of law and have a semblance of order to protect the weak and vulnerable and protect everyone. This ruling by Colorado, if it was allowed to happen, would open up a can of worms. And any time that someone didn't like a candidate for office, they could simply have them removed, making spurious claims that they engaged in insurrection. Are the 500,000 people who attended that rally that day part of an insurrection? No, they weren't. But that's 500,000 targets that political opponents could go after. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So this rightfully restores primacy to the federal government. Now, as a person who believes in a small federal government and a constrained federal government, that is not contradiction to my beliefs. This is the Constitution. It was passed. I don't agree with the 16th or 17th Amendment imposing income tax on Americans, which allowed the federal government to grow to this massive, out-of-control $7 trillion a year Leviathan. Don't agree with it, but it is the law of the land. And unless and until we remove that amendment or rescind that and stop the federal government from stealing from the pockets of Americans, which is never going to happen, it is the law of the land. And the 17th Amendment, which unfortunately took the selection of senators from the state legislatures and gave it to voters directly, that's not going anywhere either. So we'll keep electing idiots like Dianne Feinstein and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer because of the power of incumbency, not because they're good representatives or good senators, but because of the power of incumbency in political machines, whereas in the past it would have been up to the state legislatures. Yep, there you go. All right, you're welcome, folks, for tuning in. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Be sure to hit the like button. We got more likes than viewers. Not a lot of viewers on this channel. It's a shame. This is really good stuff, and it's important. So you're welcome, Hester. Thank you all for tuning in. It looks like Leah, Arctic, CB, Hakan from the Netherlands, Dark Star, hello, Tofu, CB, Patrick. 80% of the audience is in South Africa. Thank you all for that. Appreciate it. Where are the Americans? Because my broadcast is hidden from Americans. Shame on YouTube. Shame on you. Why are you afraid of the news? Why are you afraid of cogent analysis? The 14th Amendment never gave the authority to states, and the states ratified it. So you're going to say, wait a second, how can the federal government do that? The states ratified it. 3/4 of states had to ratify it within a period of time. They did, and it became the law of the land. So they made that decision a long time ago. You want to change it, then you need to have another constitutional amendment. All right, folks, thanks a lot. Take care. Thanks for being here. Do appreciate it. And y'all take care of yourselves. Where's my closing now? Gosh, do I have the closing video? I had to rebuild this whole thing here. There's the opening. There's the closing. All right, cheers, everybody.